Hello everyone, this is Zephan. This is a little guide how to use my spreadsheet. So first of all, you'll want to make a copy. This can be done via a link I'll paste here in the description, or if you're in the Classic Warlock Discord, which you should be. There is a channel under the TBC resources called TBC Spreadsheet. Here you can also find a copy. If you already have a copy of the spreadsheet but want to make a new one, this can also be done in your own copy of the spreadsheet by clicking here on press here to make a copy. Doing so will prompt a new tab with copy document. Would you like to make a copy? Yes, make a copy. This will make a new copy in a second for you. There we go. Here we have the README tab. There you can see how many days it has been since the spreadsheet has been updated with anything significantly. This is pulled from the main documents where you made a copy from. It might be you need to give access to import that data. A couple of things to also note about the spreadsheet in general, how about to use it, is that everything that is adjustable is pretty much marked, or clickable or whatever is marked in Warlock purple. So this means sometimes there are links to things. Those are marked in Warlock purple and or underlined most of the time. Here you can see an example of that at the socket value, slot value here, for example. If you go over it with your mouse, you'll see that it links to the GAMs, because those in the GAM section is relevant information. Same is true here. Other things like drop downs are marked in cells with a thick purple border. So if you click in those cells, you'll get prompted with a drop down menu where you have choices. There are also tick boxes or check boxes that are in purple, which you can check. If they are in red, it means you don't have talents or something is interfering with it, which means you cannot use it. Like here, for example, those are elixirs, but you have a flask equipped, so elixirs won't work. So whether you toggle them or not doesn't actually change anything normally. Or rather, you shouldn't be doing it. It seems this still is in, so I'll make an if function or an exception for that in a bit. Another thing to note is that sometimes there aren't checkboxes or drop downs, but you have to manually fill in a number, for example, for the amount of blood lists you receive in the encounter. Then you just go over to those cells. Those most of the time have values already pre-filled in a purple font, and then you can adjust the number of, for this example, bloodlusts that you are getting. The tabs which have relevant, which you have to manually adjust things and settings and stuff like that, are also marked in purple. So that is the parameters page, the character page, the talent page, and there is also an advanced tab where you can adjust some custom settings and stuff like that, but I won't really be going over that in this little guide. The other tabs you will see are just in a dark color. These are informational tabs which give information based on all the parameters and settings that you adjusted. So in the details page, you can see a breakdown of your damage and stuff like that. This is going to be expanded on more in the future. In the cheat sheet, you can see a top 10 listed of each item with relative values compared to your currently equipped item next to them. In the gear sheet, you can see all the gear currently available to you based on your settings and their relative values as well, and stats. In buffs page, you can see all the buffs you have currently selected and their total stats. GEMS is the same as gear, but for GEMS, based on your current settings that you can enable here at the top, you'll see different GEMS listed and their relative value. If you scroll down, you can see the same thing for meta GEMS and their relative value. Set bonuses mostly goes over and calculates the value of each set and whether it is active or not. Spells isn't all that important. That is used for all the calculations. And in calculations, you can see all the calculations. But again, this isn't all that important for this guide. In the target database, if you select a certain boss or something, the information from here will be pulled. Then you have the advanced tab, which I already said. You have the roadmap tab. This is for everything. Here is everything is listed that I still have to do and that is currently done or being worked on. So first off, let's go over to the parameters page. Here you can adjust everything about your character and relative rate setup. So there is a couple of things here to note. Firstly, that you'll also see on the character page where you can select your gear and stuff. Now this at the top, you have the 3 first values or your current DPS. So you can save your DPS by pushing on the DPS button. It might not work the first 2 times you press it because you still have to grant access to using scripts if you make a copy of someone else. So as you can see now, we got a prompt authorization is required. Just press continue, select your account, and then you can allow it. You don't need to worry about any of these scripts. They are really basic, just copying stuff over from one cell to another. Basically what the DPS button does is copy over your current DPS that you have, and then it compares that. Then that is saved, and then if you make changes or something, let's say we again go from 1 bloodlust to 2 bloodlusts in our fight, you'll see that the DPS goes up. You can see how much the DPS went up and how much of a percentage increase this is. Then next to that, we have all the stats listed that are relevant. So damage is just normal spell damage, shadow is shadow damage. And underneath you can see the totals being listed, and for example at shadow you can see how much the modifier on your spells is as well. At the moment this doesn't include ISB for shadow, but that aside, then you have the same thing for fire. The values listed here are the relative spell power values. For spell damage, spell power, it's the same thing, so it's a value of 1, but at the moment we have a fire lock setup loaded. You can see that the value of shadow damage is actually a good chunk lower. This is because it doesn't affect a good chunk of your spells. And as such, you can also see that fire has a relative higher value because that does contribute to your main filler spell. Summed up together, these two are also equal to your spell damage, which makes sense. Then you have a value for demon or undead only spell damage, like on the Mark of the Champion. Why does it give value now? Because Macterodon is selected and Macterodon is a demon, so you benefit from that. Why is it a little bit lower value than spell damage? Because it doesn't affect life tap and stuff like that. Then you have hit. This is the value displayed for hit if you're actually under hit cap. So at the moment with the current loaded setup, we have 203 hit rating. The cap is 202, so we're a little bit over cap here actually. But the value, if you would be under hit cap, would be 1.6. So 1 hit rating would be equal to 1.6 spell damage. The same here is listed for crit and haste. You can also see the relative percentage of chance to hit or chance to crit, or how much of a percentage increase you have from haste. Then you have MP5 and mana. All these are two relevant: stamina and intellect and spirit. For example, if you load or select a demo talent build, you'll see that stamina will actually give you also values because of demonic knowledge and stuff like that. So this thing at the top is something you'll see on the character page as well. Here you can also see the relative values of your stats, but then here instead you're getting the not the total value of your equipped gear, rather than the total value of everything combined with buffs and stuff like that. And here you also have your DPS value and stuff like that, and here you can also save it. So it's again white because you just recently saved it. So if you would be equipping another piece of gear or something that is worse, you'll see your DPS decrease. Voila. So back to the parameters page, there's a couple pre-made things here to make it a little bit easier for yourself. That is that you can load and save different setups if you want. For example, currently this is a fire setup that is loaded. If you go over to Shadow and you press load, you'll see that a couple settings that are relevant for simulating a setup or whatever, or fight as Shadow Destro. You'll see that the filler spell changed from Incinerate to Shadow Bolt and stuff like that. That for consumables, Flame Cap changed to Dark Rune and stuff like that. If you press save, the current load up that you made is saved to the name that you filled in this Dropbox. So if you would call this test, and for example we unclick the two dots, so corruption and immolate, we would press save, it would save that setup. If we go back to Shadow and we press load again, those two will be toggled once again. Going back to our new test setup, if you press that, you can see they are untoggled again. As this, you can adjust all these settings in here. I'll go over them in a second. Another thing you need to know, you can also save your gear loadout and everything like that. I can also load your gear loadout from the parameter page. So essentially you can do everything in here once you have set up your different sets if you want to compare stuff. And for that, the DPS saving is really relevant to see if you'll have a significant increase or decrease in DPS based on setups or stuff like that. So the first thing you'll want to adjust is the encounter. There are a couple of things here to note. You can have pre-filled in a certain bosses or AoE fights here. For example, if you click player, it will automatically adjust the level of the target to level 70 and stuff like that. If you select a boss, depending on what the boss is for a kind of target, if it's a humanoid and stuff like that, you won't be getting benefits from spell damage that is only relevant to demons or undead. But if, for example, if you select Mactarodon again, he is a demon, so you'll get benefit from it. These are some pre-made loadouts that can be adjusted also in the target database here. This is where all this data is pulled from. But also if you have stuff selected, you can override it by filling in custom values in the border next to it. So example, let's say we have Gruul the Dragon Killer, but for some odd reason stuff bugged out and there are two of them. You can add in a 1 for extra targets and it will simulate as you have two Gruul the Dragon Killers there and you're using dots on both of them and stuff like that. So you have a couple of pre-made settings here, like AoE 5 is relevant for AoE fights, but if you filled in a 1, it will only assume you have 1 extra target rather than 5 extra targets. And if you override something here, it will show the pre-made settings going as red. So things that you fill in manually yourself get priority. As such, you can toggle also if it's a dead target or not, for example, or you can select the level of the targets that you're facing, and it will adjust things to those settings. Overall, if you're fairly new to all of this, I wouldn't actually adjust too much of these settings beyond just pre-selecting some of the fights in here. Then here over at the gear settings, this is gonna change what relevant gear shows up. At the moment, this is only GAM or rather face selection that you can do here. This will probably later on be moved to the gear tab with some more in-depth choices, like if heroic gear shows, if raid gear shows, if PvP gear shows, and stuff like that. Then you have GAM options. These are adjusted in the GAM tab in a similar style that I said that I will be doing the gear tab. We'll show that in a minute. Then these things aren't implemented. Then you have custom stat weights. This influences the value that items have. So you can give a custom value to the amount of socket slots there are on gear by filling this in here. You can see the value from socket slots in or from sockets rather in the GAM tab. There is a link to that here. If you click on it, then you can use those values for the GAMs you'll be using most and fill that in here. For the same thing can be done for a meta slot. Here you can also toggle if you have a item set bonus that is currently active. For example, you have the 2 set for spell strike. If you enable this toggle, it will split the value of the set bonus over those 2 items, as to indicate that it's part of an active set in your gear comparison. So that can be useful for that. We also have the next set value, and this shows that, for example, if you would have 1 more piece, then the set bonus would activate, and that value of the activation of having an active set bonus is then compared to the amount of items you still need to get that set bonus, and then is also added to the value. So if you're looking at gear and comparing stuff and you're unsure what is actually in a set or something, you can use this to have a more clear view of that. Here we have a couple of settings that are relevant for the advanced stuff. The only real thing you need to know here is that if you set ISB to self, it will only look at your own stats. This is mostly relevant for gearing and stuff like that. I would recommend it always being on self. The only case where you would have it on custom or raid, gearing wise, that is, would be if you're a firelock, because then you don't actually cast any shadows and the ISB would be set to 0, but this isn't how it would be in most raids, because you would have an affliction warlock and etc, etc. And in the advanced tab, you can calculate what your raid ISB would be, or have a custom value. At the moment, there is a custom value that is relevant to what a affliction warlock's ISB would be like solo. So if you're simming as fire, I would just set it to custom. The pre-made setting also does this. This underneath here should be hidden and isn't really relevant. Okay. So then those are all the main configurations. Then there are things that are relevant to you as a player and to you and to your pet. So the first thing is for your character himself is that you can adjust which race you are. Of course, this will also influence racials and base stats. This then automatically says which faction you are. This will be relevant later on for gear, but that isn't currently implemented yet. Then you have talent spec. We have a couple of pre-made talent specs, and we also have a Wowhead talent spec. If you select this, it will choose. You can Here you can fill in which talent build you make on Wowhead. You can copy the link, you paste it here. If you set it to Wowhead, it will use that talent build that you made actually in the Wowhead talent calculator. Let's go back to one of the pre-made talent builds. You can also make a custom talent build, and if you then go over to talent builds, custom talent build is based on these purple columns. If you fill in the purple column with the relevant talents, you can do that here. Then later on, you'll also be able to choose your profession, and that will be relevant to the gear that is displayed and stuff like that. At the moment, just all profession gear is just available anyway. Then for your rotation, this is a big one. You can select your filler spell. So this is a spell that you would be casting if you weren't doing anything special like casting new dots or using Shadow Burn or anything like that, or Shadow Fury. So for most specs, this will be Shadow Bolt, and for Fire Warlocks, this will be Incinerate if you would be simming your threat or something, which still has to be implemented. That would be Searing Pain. For AoE fights, you can use Seed of Corruption here, and based on the amount of extra targets that you selected, your Seed of Corruption will be applying to those extra targets. Under that, we have a dot gap. This is the time on average between when a dot falls off and you apply a new dot. This is currently set at 0. It doesn't influence stat weights too much. If you would fill in here a really high amount, because for some reason you almost never reapply your dots or something like that, it would influence stat weights. But overall, you shouldn't really touch it too much. Then you can toggle corruption, immolate on and off. You can select which curse you use on multiple targets. Then if you have Siphon Life talented, now it's currently red. Why? Because we are Destro. If it would be Affliction, Unstable Affliction, then for example you'll see that Affliction, Unstable Affliction and Siphon Life becomes available to use. If we go over to Shadow Fury is also implemented as an option, but as you cannot reach Unstable Affliction and Shadow Fury at the same time, it's in the same slot. So if we go to the DN spec, you can see that Shadow Fury actually, Unstable Affliction changes to Shadow Fury. This also is accounted for with the extra targets and Shadow Fury affecting those extra targets. Dots are also assumed to be cast on the extra targets. Then we also have Shadow Burn and Conflagrate and Soulfire and stuff, but these really shouldn't be sim too much. They are all assumed to be used on cooldown. You could be using Shadow Burn and Conflagrate when you have to move, or snipe Shadow Burns in between when ISB isn't up and stuff like that. But that's not something that's really relevant towards gearing or something like that. Then let's go over to pet settings, and after that we'll go over to buffs and debuffs for both as well. For your demon settings or pet settings, you can choose which pet you're using actually. And if you're using your pet to do DPS in race rather than being sacrificed and stuff like that, you can enable here that he's receiving the same party and raid buffs as you are. For non-melee buffs or something or stuff like that, that's relevant. Then here you can choose what you do with your pet. You can demonic sacrifice him. Of course, this is only works if you actually have the talents. So, or if you use your pet to actually do DPS. Here you also have a toggle for in the case if you're doing DPS with your pets, if you're gonna pre-pop Black Book or not and swap to another trinket. And if your pet, for example, is a Falguard, although that's not really possible with these talents. Let's go to Demo Rune. You can here select to also use Cleave. If you would be using a Succubus, this would change to Lash of Pain, but I haven't implemented Succubus damage or DPS yet at this time. It might be implemented by the time you see this video. So pet doing DPS or pet being sacrificed or no pet at all this can be toggled here. Then there are a couple of different buff sections. As such, you can see Fell Armor is the first one. Here you can toggle all these buffs. There are, for most buffs, there are drop downs if there are alternative buffs. Most of the time, the buffs you'll actually want to use are pre-selected. And buffs that override each other are in the same section. If, for example, you would be a human rather than an orc, you'll see that Blood Fury will go red and won't work anymore, but Inspiring Presence, which is provided by a shaman, is enabled. There aren't any stats relevant to these buffs listed here, but those are listed in the buff section itself. If you toggle those buffs, you can see all the stats that they contribute and stuff. The same is true for pet buffs. There are also a lot of options, like if Battle Shout, how many talents the warrior has into Battle Shout and stuff. All this can be adjusted, although most of the time you would just have it at the max if it's relevant. Then for debuffs, the same thing is true. Just adjust it as you need. Most of the time you'll want to be using some of the pre-made settings, like for example, if you're fire, you'll want to load the fire settings, and you'll see that improved scorch now became enabled, because most of the time if you're playing fire you'll have improved scorch. If you want to see what the DPS gain or loss is like with or without improved scorch, you can save your DPS, you untoggle improved scorch, and you'll see that the Fire Warlock just lost 11% in this setup. But again, not everything here is optimized now for fire. All these settings are, but the gear isn't, for example. So that is pretty much everything for the parameters page. Once you have set up everything here, again, I've now done an in-depth explanation. Most of the time you'll just go to one of these parameters, you'll load them, and then you'll adjust it if something is different for your setup. For example, if you do not have a letter worker, you'll untoggle Drums of Battle. If, for example, you're not using Flame Cap but something else, you can adjust that as you like. Then we go over to the character page. This is pretty much your character pane, so to speak, in-game. Here you again can see your relevant DPS and stuff. Here there are some pre-made sets that you can equip. This is pretty much done the same as the parameter page, where if you go over to a certain name or something like that, you click it, then you do load, and it'll load everything that is relevant for you. Another thing you can do is automatically fill in your gems for your selected gear. It will optimize it based on the set bonus as well for the gems. Whatever it doesn't do is it doesn't equip unique gems, and it doesn't look at meta requirements, and it also goes over hit cap if you weren't aware of that. So it's some basic adjustments and stuff like that will still need to be done, but 90% of the gems will be filled in correctly. Here you can also see how much you are over or under hit cap. If it's red, it means you're over hit cap, because now the best gem is Grey Dawnstone in phase 1 because it gives a lot of hit. A hit is really valuable. It equipped all hit gems, and you can see you're 80 over a hit. So you'll want to adjust your gear or your gems accordingly as to optimize around hit. Here you can select each item per slot. These items are listed or displaying only items that are available to your current setup and selections, and these items are listed in order of their value, including spell power value. Then here next to that, the amount of sockets and which socket slots are displayed here. Then you can select the enchant that is relevant. Then you have your gem slots for the amount of gems that are available. If you would be selecting a gem in a slot that isn't available, it will be displayed or grayed out rather, and the stats from it will not be added to the total. So that's taken care of. If you're selecting a helm with a meta socket, it will here show that you have to select, or it will toggle a drop down with actual meta available gems. If you have another helmet, however, like instead of T4 you have Spell Strike Hood, it will show gems that are normal gems instead of meta gems. If a set bonus is active or reach, it will here be in white instead of grayed out, and the bonus will be applied. Like here you can see you gain 2 crit on Braces of Havoc because there is a yellow gem, and here you can see that there is 2 crit being added. This is pretty much it for here, and you can load relevant things. 10 talents, there isn't really anything special here, except that here you can fill in your custom values, and in yellow is displayed the active talent set. So at the moment we have listed that we are hybrid, right? Destruction hybrid, so that's listed in yellow, and you can see here following up it's also in yellow. And details, you get a damage breakdown, a mana breakdown, and stuff like that. The cheat sheet is a bit more interesting in that it gives a quick overview of the top items for each slot and how they relate to your hit. TV is total value, this includes hit value, and NHV is the total value an item has without any hit or without the hit having any value. Like this is relevant if you're way over hit cap or something like that. You might be looking towards equipping an item which is lower in value but doesn't have any hit, so you're optimizing the amount of value you have in total relevant to your hit, because hit over hit cap doesn't actually give you anything. There's also a top 10 here, biggest upgrades, if it looks at the total value, but also if it looks at no hit value. So here you can see the best items you can get which do not have any hit. So then these items here are displayed or ranked, etc., based on the value from all your gear, and here you can see how those values are derived partially. So here we have a total list of all the items available based on your settings, and it might be a little bit confusing because it's a lot of numbers and stuff, but I'll make sense of it in a second, or at least I'll try to. So you have your total value. What is this? This is the value of the item based on all the stats and stuff like that, based on the amount of socket slots, meta slots, the set bonus, which set it is from, based on all the settings you enabled here in the parameters. So the custom stat weights for socket slots and the next active set value is based on that. And then on the calculations page here, those set bonuses are calculated, and the value of having extra stamina or int or base stats or whatever, right? All that is calculated to derive a value. For example, now White Heart Crown, that value is 104 relative to spell power, right? So if you would have 104 spell power in a hit, or you would have Void Heart Crown, you will be doing the same damage, so to speak. Now the thing is, we also calculate the value of said item without any hit on it. But, for example, Void Heart Crown doesn't have any hit anyway, so it's the same value. But Spell Strike Hood, for example, has a value of 110, but has 16 hit, which means that the non-hit value is a bit lower, because a good chunk of the damage, or the value rather, is coming from spell power as well. So if you would be hit capped, or you have way too much hit, you could go for Void Heart Crown, which has 104 value, which would be lower than the 110 from Spell Strike, but because it has more value without any hits, that is the item you want to go for. Now, the values here on the two left, with the little triangle at top, is the delta value. And this is the value of the item listed relative to the item you have currently equipped. So for example, currently we have Spell Strike equipped. That means that if you're comparing just the total value from the equipped item to the item to the left for Spell Strike, it's the same item, so the difference is 0. The same thing is done for the no hit value. But if we look at other items, you can see, for example, a Void Heart Crown and total value is a 6 difference, because you have 104 total value compared to 110 currently equipped. But if we look at the no hit value, we'll see that Void Heart Crown actually has a 16.5 difference in value if you don't look at the hit. So you could potentially gain 16.5 in value if you would be making no use of the hits on your Spell Strike hood here. This is done for all the items, and if you're hit capped, this list is sorted based on the no hit value, and if you are not hit capped, it's based on the total value, as then you'll be making actual use, most likely, of the hits on set pieces. There's one more column here that is kind of irrelevant, but don't worry too much about it. This shows the value or the total value of this item, or how much total value you get on this item per hit that is on the item. So it's dividing the value of the item by the amount of hits. So the higher this number, the more likely the item is to give you a lot of value for the hit on it. But this can be misleading sometimes, as here you can see for Plague Heart. It's giving you a lot of value because there isn't too much hit on it, but there's still hit on it. So the first two values are the most important. If you see the first two values, both being green, you can be fairly sure that that is always going to be an upgrade compared to what you have currently equipped. Then we have the buff stab. As I said, this isn't all too important. You can see total modifiers here and stuff like that. And also your pet buffs and stuff. Then we have gems. This is sorted based on your settings here at the top. Something similar will be done for the gear tab, where you can choose the minimum and maximum rarity to display from gems. For now, for example, normal or uncommon gems aren't displayed and stuff. If you would lower this value, you'll see that those do get listed as well. Although most often you shouldn't really be gemming those. It's also displaying heroic gems. If you disable or untoggle it, heroic gems are hidden and stuff like that. Set bonus we already talked about. So I think we've done most of the things. Or talked about most of the things. So this is basically it. So quick recap is you go to the parameter page, you load one of the parameters that you would like for example, I would like to simulate Affliction Ruin. I'll load that. Okay, so currently we don't have anything special from gear equipped. We save the DPS. We can go and equip, let's say, phase 2 epic gems. These gear sets aren't optimized yet at the moment, but it should be better than what's currently equipped. And you see our DPS goes up relative to what we had. We could save this again. We could say, okay, so we're using, let's say, we use our imp, but it wasn't doing DPS. We do our imp, have him doing DPS. We'll see that is a 6% increase. What if we buff our imp with party buffs and raid buffs, right? What if he gets the same buffs as we do? He gains another 5, or we gain another 4.6% in DPS gain. That's how that works. And in the character page, you can do the same thing. You save your DPS. You want to compare it like, okay, now it's equipped phase 2 gear, but we aren't in phase 2, so let's say we equip the next best thing for a set slot. We'll see that it then is a DPS decrease or increase or whatever. All right. So those are the main two things you want to be looking at. That's it. Thanks for listening.